business and human rights. So this is the first of, a few classes we're going to be having combined. That is for every mentee that is partaking in the program. And I really want to encourage us to pay full attention to this class because they are designed specifically for you, right? So that you can benefit from not just what your course has to give you, but also from a full and wider scope of what we would want you to learn in the mentorship. Scopes that cover beyond just what, like I said, your course is offering. Right. So, like I said, we'll be discussing business and human rights in today's class, and I quickly want to introduce our mentors for today. Okay, our first mentor for today's class that we'll be having in this session. Our first mentor that we'll be having in this session is Mr. Onei Abe. Mr. Oyeni is a specialist in business and human rights and an adjunct professor of law at the University of the Pacific, California. Dr. Abe serves as a legal expert advising the chair of the open-ended intergovernmental working group on a legal binding instrument on business and human rights at the United Nations Human Rights Council. He has extensive experience practicing and teaching human rights, corporate law, and commercial law across Africa, Europe, and North America. Dr. Abe has held visiting researcher positions at prominent institutions, including the Center for Human Rights and Legal Pluralism at McGill's University in Canada, the Institute of Business Ethics at the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland, and the Canadian Institute of Resource Law. He also served as the Fulbright Scholar at Loyola University in Chicago, USA. He has authored numerous articles, books, chapters, and academic essays on business and human rights, sustainable development, and natural resource management. Additionally, he has provided consultancy services to international organizations such as the World Bank and the African Union, advising on various development initiatives and human rights compliance. Dr. Abe currently serves as the Executive Council of the International Law Association Nigerian branch. He is a member of the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, the Global Business and Human Rights Scholars Association, and the Business and Human Rights Teaching Forum. He earned his PhD in Commercial Law from the University of Cape Town, an LLM from the University of California, Berkeley, another LLM from the Central European University in Hungary, and a Bachelor of Law degree from the University of Benin, that is Nigeria. He is also a fellow of the United Kingdom Higher Education Academy. Mr. Olaini, if you are with us, we want to say a big welcome to today's session. Thank you so much, sir, for opting to be a mentor in today's session. You are highly welcome. Our second mentor for today is Mr. Joseph Obo. Mr. Joseph Obo spent 12 years with the National Human Rights Commission and rose to the rank of Chief Legal Office with core duties relating to human rights mainstreaming into legislation, review of government policy, and human rights in mind as providing pro bono human rights services to the less privileged. Joseph Obo is currently leading the expansion projects for foreign partnership for Nigerian companies, an online company registering platform which presently has delivered over 2,000 incorporations for clients both in Nigeria and abroad. He acted as the Group Board Secretary for Bethesda Africa Development PLC, an investment and financial service company in Nigeria. He is a mentor, the co-founder of Jiipcc Academy, as well as the president of the South Korean International Cooperation Association of Nigeria. Joseph has an LLM in Information Technology and Telecommunication from Telecommunication Law. Sorry, my network logged me out quickly. So I'll just quickly go back to reading the rest of Mr. Joseph's profile. Okay. Mr. Joseph has an LLM in Information Technology and Telecommunication Law from Strathclyde University, Glasgow, Scotland, and has attended several courses across Europe, Asia, and Africa. Thank you, Mr. Joseph, for being a mentor. And like you rightly heard, Mr. Joseph is the co-founder of Jiipcc Academy. So this academy is partly his brainchild. So yes, thank you so much, sir, for joining. We are happy to have you in today's session. So the way we are going to be going about this session is that we're going to be having our mentors come give presentations. After they are done with their presentations, we would have a discourse kind of setting, and then we'll take questions. Right. So I can see both of our mentors are on call. We would like to give the floor firstly to Mr. Oyeni. Mr. Oni, you are very, very much welcome. We're happy to have you. Like we said earlier, our topic for today is business and human rights. So, Mr. Oneniyi, sorry, sorry, sir. Please, we would like for you to come and in the next 30 minutes, just share with us what you have prepared for us in today's class. You're welcome. You're very much welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Can you hear me well?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thanks to JIPC Academy and all your team members, the founder, Mr. Obo, and everyone for the kind invitation. I've been tasked to speak on the on the topic of mainstreaming human rights due diligence in business operations in Africa. But before, and I would also like to share my screen. I don't know if that is possible. But before then, by just a quick show of hands for all those who are here, how many of you are familiar or have heard the word business and human rights or United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights? You may not have read it in details, but have you heard anything about that concept, that regulation, or business and human rights generally? By show of hands. Okay. Okay, there seems to be quite a few. Um, okay. All right. Okay, there seems to be quite a few. So I'm not just in a very, very blank terrain. Sorry, moderator, can you just confirm if you're able to see my screen?
Yes, sir, your screen is
Okay.
visible.
Great. Yeah. So what we're going to do today is to look at, I'll first of all start by talking briefly about the UNGPs, the United Nations Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which is a set of about 31 principles adopted by the Human Rights Council to regulate, most especially corporate conduct. But it's rested on three frameworks: the state duty to protect, the corporate responsibility to respect, and of course, access to remedies for victims of human rights violations. But as we all know, or as we may know, under international law, there's a state's duty to protect the citizens, which is states being subjects of international law. So that is not really contentious. And of course, access to remedies is also, states granting, access for victims through whether it's a formalized court system or an informal mediation or adjudicatory process. But the one that has been really most contentious has always been the second framework, which is the corporate responsibility to protect. So how do we rein in corporate actors? How do we ensure that they are able to prevent, mitigate, or stop any adverse effects of human rights violations? Now, because I'm sharing my screen, I may not be able to see any intervention online. So, moderator, please, if anyone has questions or comments, please feel free to jump in at any point in time. You can stop me at any point in time because I may not be able to see any raised hands or comments in the chat box. So let's start off by looking at the just a broad overview of the three pillars of the UNGPs. Like I said, it's anchored on the state duty to protect, the corporate responsibility to respect, and access to effective remedies. So it's not just access to remedies, but at least access to effective remedies for victims. So it's not that victims only have access to courts, they're able to obtain remedial mechanisms, justice for them. And this is not just a court thing. And that's why the UNGPs was very big about a concept known as operational level grievance mechanisms. What operational level grievance mechanism means is before things escalate to the level of adjudicatory process in the court system, what are companies doing at the corporate level to ensure that they prevent any form of human rights violations? And even when those human rights violations does occur, how are they able to mitigate the effect, the hardship of those? So are there mechanisms in-house in companies where victims can report to, can make complaints without fear of reprisals or retaliation? Do they create an environment for, the local communities, stakeholders to be able to, contribute to whatever project it is that is being carried on their land? And this starts by a very simple thing, right? Companies providing, whether it's email or telephone numbers, whether on their website or on their facilities, where complaints can be registered. But realistically, practically, we do see that that's almost always not the case, as I believe most of you would have experienced these, especially when it has with all these big companies and not small and medium scale enterprises. So that's just a broad overview of the UNGPs, and I'm glad some of you are well aware of what it means. But the question today, what we are looking at today, is actually a kind of what companies can do more, human rights due diligence. What is that thing that companies can do much more than what the law even says? So if the law says that you should do this, of course, companies are expected to comply with the law. But what if the law does say that? Does it mean as a company, as a corporate entity, does it mean you should close your eyes to what you are doing just because the law doesn't say this? Or as a good corporate citizen, you should be able to do well. I think for me to be able to earn legitimacy, to be able to earn the trust of the local community, I should be able to do this. Whether it is building roads, constructing hospitals, schools, get scholarship for the local community, something that will be impactful for the people that you relate with every day, the people you see every day, the local communities you interfere with their fishing, with their agriculture, with their ways of life, and even in some cases with their burial grants, because there have been some cases in Africa where in the name of development projects, we see this multinational corporation excavate burial grounds, not minding the kind of affinity some local communities, spiritual attachment, some local communities have with these places of respect. So, what is human rights due diligence? Right? What does it mean, and how does it relate to the whole concept of business and human rights, which we're talking about today? So human rights due diligence is the process. So it is a process. It's not a one-off thing. It's something that you should start even at the time of contractual negotiation with the government, that, okay, government comes, meets us and says, we want to build a dam or solar construction company in this particular environment. You should start at that point in time, begin as a corporation, you should begin to identify, prevent, and look at mechanisms for mitigate how you as a company address adverse human rights impacts. Because let's be realistic, no matter how good the intentions of a company is, when you are talking of development projects, there is almost always this possibility that you would affect human rights of the citizens, no matter how good a company is. Right. If it means land dislocation, you need a large expanse of land to construct solar panels, for example, or a dam. And where do you get the land? People are already, existing on the land. So maybe you have to relocate them. But the question is, how do you do that sustainably? How do you ensure that the human rights are not violated? Do you compensate them fairly? Do you provide an alternative residential community for them? So what is it that you do to remedy the adverse human rights impact with regards to the project that you're carrying on? So the human rights HRDD, I'll just call it HRDD, is critical to the UNGPs. It goes hand in hand with the UNGPs, and it is integral to responsible business conduct and sustainable development. But we realize in Africa, HRDD is kind of, not something we really talk about. And that's why I'm happy that JIPC is coming up with this concept. Because if you look at the global north, in Europe, in North America, they're coming with all those kinds of laws. France, Germany, Switzerland, and even the European Union, came out with a corporate sustainability due diligence directive because they understand the importance of human rights due diligence to corporate sustainability. But here in Africa, where the impact of corporate activities are really felt, what are we really doing? There's weak regulatory environment, there's limited enforcement capacity, there is high exposure to human rights, risks from extractive, industries, infrastructural projects, but there's really little or no laws, even at the continental level that will address some of these things. So maybe it's high time we begin to have these discussions, right, as to how, as leaders, we can always, look at how we can actualize, whether either it's creating laws or if it's regulations or policies with regards to human rights due diligence. So there's another level to the human rights due diligence, but I won't talk about it today. It's called heightened human rights due diligence, right? So it's heightened in the sense that it relates to companies that are working in conflict zones, right? And one thing for my own research, one thing I've realized is, especially as Africa is concerned, when it comes to issues of business and human rights, it appears that most of the places where all those development agencies work, there's always conflict there. Niger Delta, do I need to say more about the Niger Delta in Nigeria, the Katanga province in the DRC, the South Sudan, the Sahel province? It appears that when natural resources are just being discovered, it is an avenue for whether it's multinational companies or the states or local communities to just engage in a kind of conflict, right? And so that's why in some quarters it's been referred to as a resource curse. But the heightened human rights due diligence refers to a more rigorous application of human rights due diligence when businesses operate in or near conflict affected or high risk areas. So it's basically what we are going to talk today, raised to power three. Right? If I can talk in mathematical terms, that is the whole idea about the heightened human rights due diligence. So like I said, the UNGPs are anchored on three pillars, but I'll just, for the purposes of time, I will just run through these three pillars. The state's duty, we do know that states have being subjects of international law, they have a duty to protect human rights, which includes from the excess activities of business entities. So African governments, they have an obligation to protect citizens from business-related human rights abuses under both their domestic law and international human rights treaties. We do know that states are the ones that are signatories to treaties, not multinational corporations. That's why it's incumbent on them to not only ratify some of these treaties but also enforce them. So whether it's in terms of regulation, it's in terms of legislation, enforcement mechanisms, states should do much more. And that's why you see in Nigeria, for example, you see EGASPIN, you see different agencies coming up with regulations about how to curtail the excesses of corporate actions. A question which is debatable is the enforcement gaps, right? Lack of enforcement, whether it's due to corruption, weak institutions, and lack of interagency coordination. My experience has always been that when you approach this ministry or this department, oh, they tell you that we are not concerned about human rights. What we do about is trade. If you want to, talk about human rights, go to Ministry of Justice. You go to Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Justice says, well, it's not a department that talks about issues of these things. So there's no interagency coordination. There's a huge fragmentation of departments. And you see that most of the departments from some of these ministries, agencies, they're doing things that are in a way different, but at the same time, they're more or less the same thing, right? But if they could just talk to each other the more, then probably the amount of time spent on administrative bureaucracy will be lessened, and there'll be more clarity about how government and multinational corporations are working together towards achieving the same goal. I mean, it will be remiss on my part not to mention the landmark decision with regards to this topic, the Sarah case, which is a widely known case, which has borders on Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation and the Nigerian government involved in human rights violations in the Niger Delta in Nigeria. Very curiously, though, the case was more important in the fact that even though the African Commission saw that there was a significant impact on the activities of the companies, oil companies in that case, but they never said anything about, these companies. They was so hard on the states, and they actually ruled and held that the states should ensure that they comply with the provisions of the African Charter. And the reason why they couldn't really make a judgment against companies is because multinational companies have not reached that status, right? That status of liability under international law. And that's why currently we are talking about the Business and Human Rights Treaty, right, which would bring multinational corporations directly under the purview of legal liability. So at best, what you can have is domestic remedies, right? For some of these companies, and some of these companies, the remedies would only apply to domestic companies, very rarely to multinational companies, because states on the one part, they want foreign direct investment, and they want these multinational companies to come. So states think, this is my own conspiracy theory. So states think that if you go too hard on these multinational companies, they will just pack their bags and leave. So it's like a race to the bottom, right? And they don't want to do that because they need the money on the one hand, and they also want, in a way, that these companies, engage in sustainable approaches. So it's a dilemma for the state. The second framework is on the corporate responsibility to respect human rights. And this is where the HRDD really comes into play. Right. So companies are expected to avoid infringing on human rights and to address those impacts when they occur. And this concept, the HRD, they serves as a policy tool in the sense that businesses must assess risks before engaging in new projects. We have social and impact assessment, environmental impact assessment, which must be detailed, it must be transparent, you must integrate consultation with the local communities. And as a way as well, you must also integrate this HRDD into corporate governance, including supply chain. So it's not just your relation with the companies. If you're going to be buying from third parties, if you're going to be importing, all the supply chains, all the layers, the levels through which you interact with, ensure that HRDD is integrated into them. A case recently that was decided in the US was a case of Doe and Nestle, where former victims of child labor in Ivory Coast farms, right, they claimed that they were being involved in slave labor on Ivorian plantations. We do know that Cote d'Ivoire is one of the largest importers of cocoa products, the product that produces chocolates. So now they said as children, they were used on the farms, on the plantations in Cote d'Ivoire, and they felt that that was against the International Convention, that was child labor. And the argument of Nestle is a Swiss company, the argument of Nestle then was that we didn't actually go directly and employ children on Ivorian farms. We actually negotiated with Ivorian farmers, right? We had an agreement with Ivorian farmers, and we told them, get us whether it's 300,000 or 30,000 tons of cocoa. So how these Ivorian farmers, who are Ivorian nationals, how they ended up extracting those cocoa products is entirely not their business. It's not their problem, right? And the Ninth Circuit, which is a court of appeal, was pretty hard on them, right? And that was a myopic rationale, myopic thinking that just because you're not really involved in the supply chain does not mean you should not be responsible how products walk through the supply chain, right? As a good corporate citizen, as a corporate entity, it is your responsibility to ensure that all the processes, the mechanisms, the procedure, the stages where the product that you use for your final product, how it was really obtained in a sustainable manner, right? So again, you can only ensure this HRDD if there's a form of stakeholder engagement and transparency. And therefore businesses, there's an expectation that they must avoid, either direct or indirect involvement in abuses. And the last one is access to remedies. Victims of corporate abuse in Africa face major barriers to justice in terms of limited access to courts, costly and lengthy procedures, insecurity and fear of reprisals, lack of corporate transparency. What I would just say here, and I think the founder who happened to be the former, I think, staff of Nigerian National Human Rights Commission, they've been instrumental in the business and human rights, for example, in investigating and ensuring that victims of human rights abuse, corporate human rights abuse are brought to justice. In fact, the National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights, which was, I think, approved last year, the Human Rights Commission was actually instrumental in producing that document. So these agencies, tribunals are very instrumental in ensuring that victims get access to justice. Because some of these victims, if you look at them, they are not that high level of illiteracy. Some of them are not even aware that there are laws that they could rely on, and even if they are aware that there are these laws, they are not aware that how are they going to actualize their rights. Cost is also part of them. Where do they get the money from? So I recognize the activities of NGOs and human rights institutions in actualizing this. So how do we mainstream human rights due diligence into business operations in Africa? I'll just go straight to that for the purposes of time. So first of all, I think companies should identify the actual and potential impacts of their operations, including value chain. This is very, very important because what we've seen is that over the course of so many years, businesses don't really pay attention to the supply chain. All they want is, I get my product. How I got my product, how many people died in the process, how the vendors or contractors obtain this is entirely not my problem, right? Which is bad for business in a way, right? Also in terms of corporate structure at the board level, what is the board really talking about in terms of board oversight, policy commitment, right? Is there a policy within the company that says, okay, we want to go develop this particular project in a remote village in Uganda, for example? What are the laws that regulate? If there are no laws, how do we operate a sustainable approach to ensure that we develop this project? So it depends on basically four things. Basically, I call governance anchors. Number one is integration. You have to embed human rights due diligence in procurement. It always starts with procurement. How do you procure your necessary tools, equipment to be able to get the project done? And also in terms of security. One thing we see that once these companies liaise, engage with local communities can even serve as your security agents, right? Your equipments are safe, the job, they have access to job employment creation, and the company will be better for it. All the stakeholders will be better for it. The most important in this anchor for me is the contract. So at the contract stage, we see that very few, especially international contracts, lack human rights clauses. Very few international contracts lack human rights clauses. And this is very important. You see issues of stabilization clauses in this age and time. What are stabilization clauses still doing in contracts, right? It kills innovation and productivity and engagement with local communities. Then how much is the company devoting to resources in terms of training, budgets, whistleblowing, grievance, people are able to complain when they need to. And then again, how do they embed these human rights due diligence clauses? So I think it's very critical for companies to, at the governance, corporate governance level, to integrate human rights due diligence at every step or stage of the production phases in a way it becomes, because that was the idea of John Ruggie, who was instrumental to the UNGPs. We want to ensure that over a period of time, all these things become part and parcel of the company so that we don't even have to enact laws to ensure that they do what is right and proper within the boundaries of the law. So the second, in terms of the environmental lens, is how do they identify and assess this environmental lens? So they have to list potentially affected rights holders, including indigenous peoples and future generations. So who are those that are going to be impacted by a project, right? Indigenous peoples, local communities, farmers, fishermen, women, children, vulnerable people. You should have a list of the potentially affected rights holders. And then you have to be able to also refine your impacts through consultation. How are you going through the consultative level? Is it just consultation on paper or is it real consultation? Who are you consulting with? You just pick a handful of people in the local community, maybe traditional rulers or elders in the community, and then you say you've done consultation. That's not consultation. Consultation must be real, manifestly seen to be done in the language in which a local community actually understands, right? And then you integrate this existing environmental impact assessment into your HRDD. You don't have to wait for a perfect data. No data is ever perfect. Then you also, in a way, businesses should also prioritize by the severity because it's not all your impact that are severe. Some, like I said, I started by saying, even with the best of intentions, companies would impact human rights, right? The real question is how do you mitigate or correct those impacts? And how time sensitive are the impacts? If you're constructing on a land and then you bust a pipe that carries water to the village, do you just wait and say that's the responsibility of government, considering the fact that the community relies on the tap water flowing through those pipes? Do you immediately rectify it and then start looking for blame or start asking the government for a refund of how you remediated that? So businesses should be able to prioritize how they respond to HRDD impact, and then you should definitely have some action plan, the timelines, key performance indicators, review that quarterly. So it's a process. HRDD is a process. It's not a one-off thing. It's something that you have to do at the beginning, in the middle, even at the end. For example, when you're talking about mine closure, it's something that you have to assess the impact of your activities on the local community. Also, track and communication. I can spend the whole day on this. Communication is very effective, right? How do you ensure that you speak to those who are more involved in the project, the local communities? Because when the local communities wake up, they're not even aware that the project is going to be constructed on their land. Usually, the conversation is between the government and the multinational corporation, state investor arrangement, right? And when these multinational corporations get the legal license to operate, the next thing they do is to go to these local communities. And the local communities wake up and they see, these big equipments, bulldozers, and they were like, okay, what's going on? Right? So that's why we talk about social license to operate. Multinational companies should be able to engage with the local communities in the language that they understand about the impact of their project on the local community. They have to be transparent about the gaps, the improvement that they've made on any kind of damages which they may have caused, and also be able to triangulate with community feedback. It's very important, right? Because if local communities think that they have no recourse, they have no way to be able to communicate with the companies, it breeds distrust, it breeds conflict. And that's where you have, especially in the Niger Delta of Nigeria, you have significant amount of demonstrations with especially on the part of Shell or some multinational companies with the local communities. That lack of trust is there. And the only way you can build this trust is to communicate periodically and progressively with the local communities and make them understand that this is what is going on. So briefly, with just contextualize this with Nigeria, we know about the Niger Delta experience in Nigeria, the pollution that has been going on for a significant number of years, to the extent that cases are now being heard in England, right? Being the home of Shell, well, understandably, because obviously, some of these cases are very difficult to, achieve in Nigeria for obvious reasons. So we have, and one of the things which, if you look to all the cases, Okabi case, for example, you see that the problem has been with community engagement, right? Issue of legacy claims. And thankfully, there's been a response to this in a way, I would say, in terms of how the Nigerian entity is applying human rights due diligence and practice. One way is through the Petroleum Industry Act, which was signed by President Buhari in 2021. And the most significant achievement under the act was the Host Communities Development Trust, which is created. That is, companies must devote a substantial part of their revenue to be able to develop the host communities to their project. So this, I mean, is a significant opportunity, and this aligns with due diligence directive, which I talk about. But on the other hand, I believe that companies should do much more than just, what the provision of this law says. Going back to the issue of communication, right? Because how do you really achieve a kind of a social license to operate when you don't even know what the local communities want? And the only way you can know what the local communities want is if you communicate with them. And one of the things I've seen from practice is multinational companies, especially foreign companies, they assume they know what the local communities want. And so they go to a community, they start building roads, they start building schools, and they say, oh, well, we are doing good. Well, those are good, right? Schools, hospitals are good. But is that really what the local communities want? Or they just don't want you to pollute the environment? So you can build as many schools as you want, as many roads as you want, but don't pollute the environment. Don't come to our burial grounds. Don't, interfere with spiritual places of attachment. But if you don't engage with them, you will not be able to know this. So what companies in Africa can do again is to be able to identify, like I said, vulnerable groups, apply gender and inclusivity in your approach to development projects, meaningfully engage in terms of free, prior, informed consent, and then operational level grievance mechanisms, which is accessible during crisis. Like I said, this is just a corporate-based grievance mechanism. So this is not state-based. Operational level grievance mechanism is not state-based. It's not a court system. It's just avenues, approaches which the company has identified and opened up for the local communities or the host communities to be able to hear their grievances or complaints, or feedback on whatever issues that the host communities may be experiencing. So in conclusion, I think as future lawyers and attorneys, we should understand how international human rights norms interact with domestic legal systems. We also should be able to assess how Nigerian legal reforms or African laws can integrate these concepts, human rights due diligence principles. Also, we should be able to develop, advocacy and legal strategies to strengthen accountability in corporate and public sectors. And there are lots of NGOs, both in Nigeria and Africa, that are working on the boundaries of legal strategies to strengthen accountability. The Natural Resource Governance Institute, for example, has an office in Nigeria. They have a wide repertoire of resources on how corporate entities can, adopt these human rights due diligence holistically. Also, strengthening HRD in Africa requires legal innovation, judicial activism, and community empowerment. Business and human rights, it's been about, a couple of years, over a decade years old. But you realize that, again, one of the problems we face is judges in Nigeria and mostly in Africa, actually, don't really recognize the importance of adopting these principles. Yes, they are principles in the sense that they are not laws, so they are at best persuasive. But in other climes, in other regions, in other developed countries, these principles have actually, judges have actually relied on these principles in a way to reach decisions when it has to do with host communities suing multinational companies. So I believe Nigerian judges can do more in recognizing the provisions of business and human rights principles and considering it, even if they're not going to rely exclusively on it, but they should be able to continue these principles in giving original decisions, especially when it has to do with multinational companies and those communities. And we can drive the transition from extractive capitalism to sustainable accountability in our approach. The old buzzword now has been just transition, renewable energies, energy justice. But if you're not careful, if it's not done right, we discover that all the problems associated with fossil fuels, with oil and gas, the environmental disasters, the oil pollution, the human rights impact, we are going to move it over to just transition, to renewable energies, right? Because we need these non-renewables, these critical minerals, and lithium, cobalt, we need it to, do renewable energy projects. And how do we extract these critical minerals if we don't emphasize or ensure or strengthen HRDD? So HRDD goes beyond all the life cycle of all projects that we can have, and it actually bridges the gap between profit and protection. I'll stop there, and I'll give the room for questions or comments. So thank you very much for listening.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Oyeni. Thank you for sharing your thoughts in a very short time, but quite extensive or quite expansive in your explanation. We really, really do appreciate. So the opportunities for questions will come a little bit later on, but then we'll be taking a discussion from Mr. Joe, and then we'll give room for questions. So, Mr. Joseph, sir, please, we also want to get to hear from you. Share your thoughts on the topic for today.
I don't know, can you hear me, Mr. Dennis?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay,
Sorry,
yeah.
here.
Firstly, I want to say a very big thank you to Mr. Oyeni.
Now we can't seem to hear you.
Okay, Mr. Joseph, your network is freezing. It's a bit shaky.
Already, let me take the AirPods off. Just a second. Is it better now?
Yes, much better.
All right, thank you very much. Yeah, so I was just trying to thank our first mentor for the very wonderful presentation. I personally was taking notes. It's really refreshing to see that conversations around business and human rights are coming to fore on the continent, because much more than we've had this discussion today, we definitely know that if you're talking about business and human rights, you are looking at other continents in the global north. There doesn't seem to have, I don't think we have gotten to that point where awareness is really a big deal. Because in my opinion, when I ask people on a general basis, what is business and human rights, much of the time, nobody really seems to, people, even average people who are working good jobs, people who are even representing your interests, maybe even in the legislature, for example, they necessarily do not understand what business and human rights is really about. And I just want to, I have 15 minutes, so I will try and use that very judiciously. Like recently, we've been having this situation between Dangote Refinery and Pengasen. If you read about that issue deeply, you would find out that beyond the politics, beyond the interest, beyond everything that nobody's really bringing to the fore, you would definitely realize that much of the issues are also grounded, within business and human rights. And it's very important that when we see corporates carrying out certain activities or acting in a certain way, we have a duty as legal minds, even as young professionals. I know that we have non-lawyers on this platform also. So it's important for you to be able to look behind the scene to really be able to identify what are the human rights issues that are present in this particular policy discussion or even an environmental discussion. I think our mentor mentioned something around maybe a burst pipe providing water to a community, and maybe a company's heavy duty trucks. In fact, I experienced that where I live in Abuja. There's a project currently going on, and the water supply from the water board, that pipe was damaged by caterpillars of a certain company handling the contract. The community reached out. In fact, our community reached out, and for almost a week, we couldn't still get them to do the right thing. And you might want to say, okay, what are the redress options? For example, what are the remedies? If we start on that pathway, just that a lot of people may not want to now say, okay, let's go to court or let's go for mediation, things like that. But at the end of the day, the community still had to take up that responsibility of ensuring that, having stayed without water for several days, we had to solve that problem, internally. So these are just some of the examples that are around us. If you go to certain parts of the city in Abuja, where I live, for example, you realize that you are finding a lot of heaps of refuse. And I'm sorry I'm saying this on this platform. You find all of those things. This refuse did not get to those places by themselves. It's little companies, larger companies, individuals, but let me stick to the companies that do not have like a waste disposal policy within their operations. They now find out that at the end of the day, they have to carry out, they would disrupt the enjoyment of the rights of other people by virtue of their inability to dispose their refuse properly. You will see some roads, almost half of the road is covered by refuse. So when we're talking about business and human rights, somebody can look at that issue and the only thing they do is to blame who is responsible, who are the actors that are responsible for the waste disposal, the inappropriate waste disposal. How can we begin to have those conversations with those companies to know that by carrying out that action, they are actually breaching, another person's rights is already people's rights to health, right to the enjoyment of their premises, even air pollution. You can bring out a whole lot of things by virtue of the actions of companies. I actually came up with a slide, but basically, I just want to share because I listened to our mentor mention the fact that boardrooms, this message has to go to boardrooms. And I know that we are speaking with lawyers, and many lawyers, maybe once you've done your call to bar, you're already practicing, the probability that you'll be working with a company is almost 100% as far as you're a lawyer in Nigeria. Even those lawyers that are into criminal law, that handle criminal law cases, they still, based on their private practice, they will still engage with companies. So it now begs the question, what can you do as a lawyer? What can you do as a young professional? What can you do as a Nigerian to add your voice, to what, when we talk about business and human rights, how can you amplify the message? Because what I feel basically is lacking within the African sphere is really about amplification of the message. The awareness is very low. I know that I spent about 12 years, 12 years with the National Human Rights Commission before I resigned my job to do my private activities and all of that. And I can tell you that the bureaucracy that exists within government, sometimes it's a very big challenge as it relates to action, taking action. Maybe if it were a private company doing certain things, they can easily take decision immediately to be able to prevent or to mitigate or to remedy, things like that. But when you now domicile, the entire maybe human rights powers in a commission, they have to follow their own laid down bureaucracy. Sometimes it's good, other times it might prevent those that require remedies from getting it on time. That's why what the commission does, and I'm not a mouthpiece for the National Human Rights Commission, but I know for sure that one of the things that we did then was the fact that we had a lot of these NGOs, a lot of law firms that interface with the National Human Rights Commission that provide pro bono services. You mentioned also the issue around the Niger Delta, the pollution, the environmental degradation, and all of that. I know that there was this UN report. I can't recall now, but I haven't necessarily heard so much about the cleanup that the former vice president at the time, Professor Yemi Oshibajo, was in Rivers at the time to flag off something at that time. I wouldn't know what has happened in that direction, but I'm trying to say that we cannot always look at the government. We cannot always look, we should not even focus all of our attention on companies, because these companies that we talk about, especially the smaller ones, I'm not talking of very big companies that have maybe legal teams that understand human rights, they understand ESG, they understand sustainability issues. I'm not talking of those kinds of companies. I'm talking of companies that some of us here might have interactions with. What are those little things that we can do? That how can we amplify this message of human rights and business, or business and human rights, to the little companies, to companies around our localities? How do we push that particular message so that people can really get the point, and everybody is playing their own part and playing their own role to be able to ensure that companies are held to a higher standard. And the idea basically, because some people would think that if you're a business and human rights compliant company, I'm not just talking about a company that has like maybe a business and human rights policy and they are just ticking boxes. Okay, we do this, we carry out CSR activities, we do all of these things, because I would tell you that I had the opportunity some years back. I was working with a group of companies. I was on the group of companies had the group of company had diverse other companies, and I was the board secretary for all of those companies. And before then, I didn't really know so much about business and human rights. So when I take like a reflection backward, I can now then see that I missed out on an opportunity to really share the norms, the values, the ideas of business and human rights within the operation of that company. Because when I look back and I'm thinking, oh, this company they carried out XYZ activity, they carried out XYZ action. But if we had the proper knowledge of business and human rights, I would have been able to influence certain things, especially with the chairman of the company, to see how we would have taken decisions in an entirely different manner because of the understanding of business and human rights. So the idea basically now is everyone listening here, you're a student, you're a law student, you're an international relations student, you're an undergraduate, you're already a lawyer. You are like an arrow that is being fired back into society. You are going to come in contact with a lot of corporates, a lot of companies, and it's our expectation that you take this message of business and human rights into that particular space so that you can also be part of the problem solvers. You can be part of those who would bring the right solutions to companies. It would just be a simple idea that you'd share. This action that this company is trying to take, have we carried out some level of human rights due diligence to see the impact of this decision through the lens of human rights? So that's primarily what human HR DD is really about. How can we look at the impact of companies through the lens of human rights? So with this knowledge, you can begin to transform that particular space wherever you find yourself. You can begin to add value. Then when next you see any news that relates to business, you watch television or maybe you're on social media and you hear that maybe some persons were malhandled, some persons were not given access, maybe to their workplace, or they were denied certain rights, they were discriminated against, a company is discriminating against maybe employees, then you can better understand that beyond what that news item feels like, there is a deep-seated human rights issue that needs to be brought to fore. So when we are having comments on social media and you have the opportunity to set certain records straight from an intellectual perspective, just to show that there is something really going on that is wrong, that is not in line with human rights value systems and value systems basically, then you can begin to shape knowledge of corporates, in that particular sense. I wrote few things down. Okay, I've shared my experience in the boardroom, and I believe that many of us would have such opportunities as lawyers as well to provide services for companies in that regard. So you can take your time beyond this lecture. You can study much more about business and human rights and see how you can also add value within that particular sphere. Then, yes, I think Mr. Dennis, I'm not sure how much more time I have, but I will just quickly take one or two things that I put here on my slide. We will definitely share the slides to all of us so that we can be able to go through. So I just want to quickly share one or two things that I put out here. Just give me a second. I want to pull that up on my system. One moment, please. Yes. Because I'm more focused right now on what you can do, what you and I can do. How can we better, make our country a better place? I'm aware of the CS, that's the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive and all of that. The impact that is going to be having from, is it 2027 or thereabout? Europe is already tightening regulation, and for you to do business with European companies, you would have to definitely comply with one or two directives here and there. So how are companies within, Nigeria even preparing for that kind of engagement? What laws do we even have? And one thing I know for sure within Nigeria, we have like the National Action Plan, for example. I've gone through that document front and back, and I know that the National Human Rights Commission was supposed to, I think they've actually already constituted the working group, but I haven't really seen so much from the the BHR working group that Nigeria has. And I'm hoping that we would be able to at least engage a whole lot more, because that working group has several departments, ministries, agencies, but it's still within a bureaucratic setup. And that is supposed to be so much more of a strength than a weakness. And I'm trying to, I hope that we are going to be able to enjoy the strength of what the working group is supposed to be doing in terms of ensuring that they are mainstreaming all of these value systems, human rights value systems, across their own sectorial value chain, because I feel that that's the only way that we can get as much value as possible. Because having a beautiful document, a national action plan, it can sit on the shelf of a country and nothing really gets done at the end of the day. But I know that Nigerians would definitely pick up on a lot of things, and we need to put the awareness out there. So the question I'm basically asking right now is, what can you do? What can you do as a young professional? What else can you do beyond having to listen to this? What can you do? I was reading a report recently. I think it was on a company that had more like a recruitment company, and the AI that handles that whole recruitment process maybe has already been fed with different algorithms that makes it easy to carry out discrimination on a large scale. So you can see that it's not just about words anymore. Even within the AI space, we have to see how we can take business, that's BHR value systems, into that space so that we can get value. Are persons being discriminated against because of jobs, things of that nature? Something as simple as making a job application, and sending your CV, you would be shocked to know the back-end human rights violations that might be taking place. So these things should tickle everybody's fancy. It should prompt our mindset to begin to think about, the larger picture, the bigger picture. And for me personally, I feel that that picture has to commence from a place of massive awareness. So if you're going to be asking questions, let's see how we can get those questions for Mr. Oyeniyi and myself as well. Let's see how we can, pick up more examples. And I believe that in doing the little that we've done through this mentorship program, especially this session on business and human rights, with a focus on HRDD, that's a human rights due diligence, I believe strongly that we've been able to pick one or two things. We've been able to identify, our own place where we can act and where we can make the most impact as much as possible. So I'll just read a few things here. One, the practical ways that you as a person, you listening to me, the practical ways that you can apply HRDD. Be observant. You can raise concerns, like when you see things like I mentioned earlier, you read a news item, you're on Instagram, you've seen something, you can raise those BHR concerns respectfully. You can begin to put those issues out there intelligently so that people can understand the rationale or the reasons why we need to bring BHR issues, especially where companies are, have infractions in that particular area. We can throw light on it. Many of the times, these companies might not even have a business and human rights policy. If you take a statistics now, maybe in Nigeria, you may be shocked that less than 1% or even 2% of companies even understand what business and human rights is really about. So that means that the field is very ripe for everybody or anyone who is interested in this field to begin to talk about it, to begin to raise awareness around it, to begin to, have seek that stakeholder support and build and build towards ensuring that companies now see the reasons why human rights is necessarily not to their disadvantage. Business and human rights is not to their disadvantage. It would actually give them the right publicity. It will give them, the right public image, and that's really key for business. Nobody wants to do business with maybe if you're talking of internationals now, for example, they don't want to be enmeshed in any scandal, with a company that is into, like there was this company in Nasarawa State, I think it was a mining company, where for women that work on the mine sites, before they assess work on a weekly basis, they have to go through some sexual exploitation just to be on a mine site. So those are really things that happen, and you'll be shocked how deep rooted some of these things are when you move outside of Abuja, you move outside of Lagos, you now move into the interior parts of our country, where illiteracy is on a very high scale. Nobody is even talking about business and human rights. They are talking about survival. So it's our job to make sure we keep as much as possible when we come across business and human rights issues, as far as it relates to corporates, to companies. Add your voice, add your voice. Corporate responsibility is very essential, is very key. And I'm very happy. I see the work that Mr. Oyeniyi does with the NBA. I don't know if it's the Nigerian Bar Association or the IBA now, but at least I've been through your page. I've seen a lot of events that you hold, and I'm really happy that much of this, we have Nigerian professionals who are really taking up these issues, and it will really be nice to have a whole lot more young persons on board who can push this narrative beyond the speeches, but through engagement, especially on social media and other platforms. Let's see how we can become a ready tool to bring about some sanitization of corporate practices in Nigeria as far as it relates to business and human rights. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for listening. I think I'm already out of time. Let's champion awareness. Let's collaborate as much as possible. Then, as far as your daily work is concerned, especially as lawyers, you're drafting a contract, and you know that the way you're drafting this contract, somebody's right somehow in the value chain of the work that you are doing is going to be breached. You owe yourself that moral duty to see how you can rephrase certain things in contract agreements. You can talk to your clients, you can talk to companies that you work for to see how they can begin to look at issues through the lenses of business and human rights. I think that's a starting point. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Dennis. Back to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Joseph, for your thoughts that you shared. We really, really do appreciate the feedback. Sorry. We really do appreciate the shared thoughts in class. The session has been quite engaging in terms of the shared knowledge that has been communicated by both mentors. And what we want to do right now is to have an interactive session, more or less, right, where both mentees that are on the call, right, who have seen and maybe experienced human rights violations, have seen and have questions about, within the context of where they may be, whether if it be in Nigeria or any other place in Africa where they have experienced such violations. If you will want to have those kind of interactions where you can ask questions and get to find out more about what is going on within the business and human rights space. So from the mentee side to things, right? If you have any question, please you can kindly do well to indicate by raise of hand. Right, we want to have an interactive section. I'm sure you have learned one or two things, and I'm also sure you have a few questions in mind. Right, so let's take questions from the side of the mentees. Do we have questions?
All right. If you don't mind, Mr. Oyeni, I just wanted to ask you to just give us a feeling of what it's like in practical terms, especially in terms of how your work has given you access to resolving, identifying, mitigating, all of those terminologies. How does that practically interface with the work that you do in terms of the value creation? I wouldn't know if you could just give us just a feel. We would like to just know how business and human rights, really works in that practical sense.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. Just to take a step back, I really enjoyed your intervention. I got a lot of notes, and I can't emphasize enough some of the things which you identified. Like, for example, the last thing you talked about in contracts, for example. I receive a lot of, I leave a lot of international contracts when people send to me to go over. And when I receive this document, the first thing I go to jump it, I scan through, and if I don't see these keywords, something I call keywords, sustainability, human rights, due diligence, or things that are sustainable in nature, I'm like, no, this is not. It already creates a bias, mindset for me that how can you be having this international contract? Yes, I know contracts trade are anchored on money. You need foreign direct investment. But where money is not equitably sourced, it becomes a problem. And again, you also mentioned awareness. This is also some of the things, in fact, in my doctorate, when I did some empirical research, one of the things I identified is lack of awareness, significant lack of awareness. A lot of people don't even know that the UNGPs exist. And when when they even know, they were like, what can we do about it, right? So, and that's why I'm currently collaborating with some institutions on how we can actually, maybe the academic also can help with these, how we can, well, we can't really change the curriculum, especially in secondary or university level, but how we can introduce this concept in schools at a very early stage so that they understand and appreciate what it means, and how so that when they get to a much more advanced level, they will be able to know how they can operationalize it. Now, in terms of how my work actually my background is being a researcher. I've been a teacher for significant number of years, and I do consultancy. And one of the things I try to identify is talk to people and understand their own perspective about some of these issues. And in most of the people, so I've talked with executives, I've also talked to people on the other side, the stakeholders, and some of them seem to have the same answer to my question, right? Whose fault is it? Whose problem is it? How can we resolve it? On the part of the executives, they were like, okay, we go to some of these places. There are even no laws. We do one, two, three, and then you tell us we are not doing enough. When those enough that we are doing is even supposed to be government doing it. On the part of local
Yeah.
communities is that there's no communication. We don't even know who these people are. We don't even know why they are doing this. And even the state is not even giving us question. You give an example about, in your community where a company bust a pipe. That's the highest level of responsibility. I mean, people, even apart from being a company, money-making venture, as human beings, what is it that is going on in the minds of those people why they're acting like that? So my research has actually generated a lot of conversations around all these issues, right? I do writings, and again, that's one of the things I want to talk to your mentees about is if you can, you don't have to be appointed as an ambassador for you to make, impact. You can start at your very small local level by writing, right? You read up in news, like you said, just write something about it, right? Put it on social media. Don't underestimate the effectiveness of social media, especially TikTok, for example, right? Put it there. You might be dignifying in your remarks because you don't know yet. Maybe you will also, because I've seen a lot of friends who are on this side of activism NGO, and a few years later they move to the other side, being corporate, actors, and of course, their voice, they started singing a very different tune. But at least raise those issues to the front burner of discussions. And I believe if we continue to engage robustly with some of these issues in our writing, when companies are not doing well, you call them out. There's really nothing that is wrong in that, which is what I do. And companies might just pick it up and say thank you. And seen a lot of companies that reached out to me that thank you. We didn't actually think about it this way in what we did, and we would like to engage with you further as to how or what we think we can do. So some companies are responsible. They would respond to you in a good if you approach them constructively. Some are just not so responsible. I mean, there are some companies which they don't really care about HRDD. Even when you start talking from now to tomorrow, business and human rights does not apply to them in any way, form, or fashion. And I know you know what I'm talking about. So, but at least the vast majority of companies out there, and they reached out to me. Some have even read my writings, and we are trying to develop some set of tools or indicators or code of conduct, toolkit, for example. How can you assist us in doing this? And yes, I've responded. But again, it depends on you making yourself available, making your work available, making your voice known and heard. That all we are asking for is good, environmental, sustainable approach towards doing it. And I don't think that's really much difficult to achieve.
Thank you so much. So I think, Mr. Dennis, we can just quickly go into the Q&A session, if you don't mind. I think we can do that quickly.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Joseph. We're taking questions. So please, if you kindly have a question, do well to raise your hand. By show of hands, we will take your question, or you can send your question into the chat box if that will be possible. So can we take questions? Do we have those with questions in class? I want to encourage mentees to ask questions. Questions are what makes the discussion flow more and more, right? It's how okay. Babatunde, I can see you are raising your hand if I'm not mistaken. Please, you can go ahead, unmute and ask.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you very much, Sas, for the very, very enlightening session. It's been I took a lot of notes down. So to my question is, I think Mr. Oyeni said that it can be very hard holding government institutions responsible when in regard to human rights and business impeachments, when you on the person's human rights. Take, for example, the Sujimoto and the Enugu State government. I mean, the story on his part was completely different from what the Enugu State government publicized outside to the internet. So now, in that situation, how would you suggest that we can, or someone like Sujimoto, how do you suggest he can probably bring to power or bring to force his human rights enforcement? And even you also give certain another example of the Pegasus and Dangote. So situations like that, since it's very, very hard to hold down government institutions rather than, other private institutions, what are the other means you think you can use these individuals that their rights have been infringed? What do you think means they can use to bring to force their rights? So.
Yeah, do you want me to respond or wait for all the questions, moderator?
So you can respond. We will take the questions as they come.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Babatunde. I don't really know that much facts about this Sujimoto example, but if it relates to some of the other experiences or examples that you're giving, again, this is part of the conversation we're having. We don't really need to wait to the time at which it gets so adversarial and the point of going to court before we start raising up these issues. Companies should be able to engage. States should be able to create the environment. States don't really, they're not good in terms of all these HRD. Theirs is just to enact laws, make regulation, and create the enabling environment for companies to thrive. Where companies don't thrive successfully, then it becomes a problem. But almost always, what my experience has always been is usually states and businesses align together against host communities or local communities. But it appears that in this your question, it's about the state and versus the company. But the court is in this instance, since it has gone adversarial, the court has always been in this instance, the court will always be in the best avenue. Another instance could be advocacy in terms of the NGOs. This is where the NGOs come in. How are they? Do they have all the facts? If they have all the facts, the figures, then NGOs would help in protecting the rights of local communities. We can also utilize the services of the media, the fourth estate of the realm, as they call them. The media have also been instrumental. There are investigative journalists that can even work much more. They have the resources to do much more than this. And I know a good number of them are actually funded by NGOs. So they'll be more than interested to take over this case and bring all the issues, right? Expose all the issues and and then talk about what it is that is really going on in such communities. So I think it's just to look at all the avenues that you can utilize to ensure that the rights of the victims and local communities are protected in this instance.
Well, thank you so much, sir. I would just want to add briefly that one of the things that every company, every responsible company should have is more of having a very good PR system, a system where there is over communication with your stakeholders. I also don't know so much about. I just read a few things online on Twitter and all of that about the Sudimoto incident with Enugu State government, but I believe that if there was over communication with the Enugu State government, for example, in terms of they wanting to reach out and engage, and they are not getting, maybe they couldn't get all the feedback that they needed from Sujimoto, or as the case may be. But if companies if companies learn to come out of their cocoon, and you have a contract, you have all of these things, you must have already mapped who your stakeholders are, on that kind of a project. So communicate. You can never go wrong on over communicating. That's what I personally feel. And I feel that if that strategy was basically deployed, we wouldn't be having what we're having at the moment, where the EFCC is now already involved in the issue, and everybody is telling their side of the story on the pages of the media, when that story would have been more of like a back story engagement. There would have been a back door or a backstage engagement, without us having to even know what basically happened at the end of the day. But the reality is that, as a responsible company, you must open communication lines with your stakeholders as much as possible, because we are talking about human rights here, and the rights of the community, the rights of the students who should be using that project. There are a lot of ways you can look at this particular issue, but I feel that we must err on the part of over communication.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. It's you can never be found guilty of over communication. Over communication is better than no communication at all. And I believe if you put all the facts in a transparent, honest manner, then you will definitely have that trust and legitimacy from the local communities.
All right. Thank you to our mentors for helping us answer that question. And thank you, Babatunde, for sharing, or for asking rather. So we have two people raising their hands. We'll take their questions, and then we'll go back to the chat box. I can see some questions here too. We'll be going to Obioma Pearl, right? So we'll be taking your questions first, then Anita, and then Victoria. Pearl, please, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for such an insightful section. So my question is, how can companies balance profits with human rights and environmental protection?
Sorry, can you say that again? How can companies
balance profits with human rights and environmental protection?
Oh, okay. That's a very fantastic question, and that's a question I get all the time. It's very easy. It's completely easy. So just think about it in terms of this way. I mean, how a company operates is determined at the boardroom level, right? And the idea, corporate laws all over the world are designed to be shareholder-centric, right? This is something that has to do with corporate law all over the world. There's nothing we can do about that. Corporate laws are designed to ensure that shareholders get the maximum value for their returns. So shareholders want to be happy at the end of every financial year. Now, of what joy and benefit will it give the company if your company is involved in destroying human lives, in polluting the environment, in ensuring that women 20, 30 years from now become infertile because of exposure to these toxins? Now, what joy would that even give to the shareholders, who are themselves occupants of the local communities? So if you are profit maximizing, right, the detriment of human lives, it becomes a critical issue of the humanity of those who manage the company as well. And that is why apart from the shareholder approach, over the course of years in terms of corporate governance, a stakeholder-centric approach has emerged that in as much as we want profit, we must also be careful how that profit is extracted to ensure that the community and the society benefit. So it's not only shareholders that we should cater for. We should cater for all other stakeholders, the local communities, the consumers, the employees. And that theory as overriding shareholder. I think that was Milton Friedman in the 70s who says the purpose of companies profit maximization. The ship has since sailed for that. Any company starting off today who thinks I can make profit without recourse to humanity, it's pretty much going to fail. And that is why you see companies like Shell. We are all living examples to what Shell is doing in Nigeria and other companies. That is why they have all been losing out when the cases are had in England or in other developed zones, right? And once they see light beyond the tunnel, what do they see? They end up setting out of court because they know that if they are definitely going to lose, the court is going to give them, give them judgment. So they settle. And what I think, so why did you settle before it even gets to court? Why didn't you just get the host communities? Why are you arguing that it's a matter of sabotage or this or that? But now you're in court. You are seeing the direction at which the case is going, but now you not think it's time to settle. So that's just the politics behind, some of these multinational corporations. So absolutely, profits can go right in hand with human rights protection. And I agree with you in terms of my conversations with some companies. Adopting, enforcing or complying with human rights principle is very expensive. I have to be frank with you. It is very expensive. And that is why most companies says, I'm just here to make money. My legal license says I should construct 1, 2, 3. I should construct a project, a dam or whatever. That's what I'm going to do, and I'll get out of the system. And that's why you see a lot of Chinese companies doing now in Nigeria. Most of them don't care for labor laws, most of them don't care for human rights. The government says I should build 1, 2, 3. I'm going to build 1, 2, 3 and I'll leave, right? But we see that most companies on the long term, most companies that engage in human rights, they actually have the trust and legitimacy of the local communities, and they are sustainable at the long run. A comparison I like to make is between gas-powered cars and electric vehicles. I mean, if you go to the market today and you want to buy electric vehicles, they're more expensive than gas cars, right? But if you think in terms of the sustainability approach, if you think in terms of maintenance, electric vehicles are less costlier to maintain than gas-powered cars. You don't change the oil, you don't, go for servicing, all you just have to do for electric vehicles is just to charge. But at the initial stage, it is expensive to buy, right? So the same thing with companies that involved in human rights protection. Yes, it is expensive, but once you set up these processes, right, you align with all these human rights processes, human rights indicators, then you realize that your company is better for it. One of the projects I was involved in the last couple of years is Goldfields. So Goldfields is an Australian company that in South Africa, then Ghana, then Peru, they're all over. So they realize that everywhere the company is operating, they always have problems with the local communities. Always have problems with local communities, just like Shell, right? And what did they do? They just decide to they contracted a good number of us to do like a consultancy study, and they realized that some of the problems, out of so many problems, one of the problems is it's not that the local communities don't like what they are doing because they're also they want to better the environment and the society, but it's just the approach in which they do it. So they come to the community, the local communities, like the example Joseph gave, they destroy pipes, for example. Who do local communities approach? The multinational companies, the companies. Whereas by design, the people that they're supposed to report to is the municipality, the local government, that this is what has happened. But it takes them longer time to travel to wherever the office is. But the people they see every day is these multinational companies. And you can only fight with people you see. You can't fight with imaginary forces or people you don't know or see. So that is why they attack them. And so what did they do? They actually got the police involved. They got the members of the security forces involved. And it decided that, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to integrate this host community in our project. job creation, local content requirement, even as more or less, they didn't call them police, but like security forces managing our equipment. So if any, this is equipment on your property. If anything damages, it is your responsibility. You're going to own it, right? And you realize since that time, there has been this coordinated efforts between the company and the local communities. It didn't really cost them any money. All it did was just to negotiate, and they still made their profit, right? Talk about Shell. Another example is talk about Shell today. Shell doesn't extract a single oil in Ogoniland, right? Because of their last decades of environmental pollution. In fact, the mere mention of Shell in Nigeria today triggers sentiment and resentment. So yes, Shell is making a lot of money, but what corporate image do they have, right? Absolutely none. They have no credibility. They have no reputation. So companies that are still adept at this idea of profit maximization without stakeholder-centric approach, they're only, pushing themselves for self-destruction, right? And we have a good number of companies that have been able to do that successfully, merge the two. And because if you go to all these companies where they're domiciled, where they're incorporated, Shell cannot do half of what it does in Nigeria, in the UK, or in Netherlands. They cannot, right? They are able to successfully comply with all the laws, labor laws, security laws, human rights laws. They do that even in Kenya. Some British tea companies were involved in a lot of degradation and labor rights in Kenya. But you see that these companies cannot do that in England, right? Of course, we know the reason why, effectiveness of the laws, enforcement, and all those things, but even the reaction of the local community. So that's why I think as mentees, we should do more as activists. I mean, I'm not saying you should go on the streets carrying placards, but let our voices be known, right? Let's utilize social media campaign. Don't underestimate the power of, TikTok, Twitter, or any other avenue to ensure that these companies should know that what they are doing is. I know it's a little bit challenging, especially in that region, especially when you have states that are not really aligned with your approach. But a lot of people have died in the past for this. Ken Saro-Wiwa, a lot of activists, and their results. Part of what Ken Saro-Wiwa did, part of his actions, actually led to what we are discussing today, the business and human rights debate, right? So I believe companies can successfully, and I know quite a few companies that have been able to blend profits and human rights protection. I would rather work with a company that integrates human rights mandate in its company, in its business philosophy, than go and work with a company that is irresponsible.
In fact,
all right, thank you so much, Mr. Oyemi. Thank you so much, Mr. Oyemi.
Okay.
So we'll be taking questions from Anita.
Oh, I think Joseph wanted to say something. I don't know.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that listening to you felt like a lecture, and there's so much to unpack from the last 3 minutes of your conversation, of your response. I didn't necessarily want to add anything, but the only other thing I wanted to just touch on had to do with an experience that I think a former governor's son, he came into the country on a wheelchair and stopped by an eatery at the airport in Lagos. And he was asked to, this was about 2 years ago, he was asked to leave the premises so that space could be created for other persons who wanted to make a purchase. So it was a very embarrassing thing for the brand, because
Very, very
it's a brand that we all engage with here in Nigeria. So I feel that in terms of ethical leadership, there's need for companies to also train their employees, people who represent them on a daily basis, to come to terms with what their actions mean, especially when they go overboard and maybe their human rights breaches and all of that. So that's the only thing I wanted to just add, so that I don't take the attention away from all the things that you've actually shared. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Charles. Anissa, please, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, good evening. So first of all, thank you to the mentors for these wonderful lectures that you have given to us. My question pertains on HRDD, which is the human right due diligence. When it comes to companies, Mr. Abe, you said something about when you check like international contracts, you're talking about due diligence if you don't see the clauses like human rights, due diligence, and sustainability, that, I mean, it crosses a lot of things from you and from the clauses and the contracts. So I want to ask, like, for a new lawyer who is just branching out from after just being called to the bar and is trying to create a path for himself, how would they be able to branch into making social impact, especially once the person becomes a secretary to a company and then these clauses comes in hand, and in situations where maybe the companies have issues with a local community, how would they be able to sort it out using this HRDD, sir? That's my question.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think even as a young junior member of the bar, you could, suggest or recommend to your bosses that, in line of recent approaches towards, international, or if it's a local domestic contract, it is important that companies continue to realize the importance of HRDD and sustainability approaches. You can make reference to a lot of laws, like I said, the Petroleum Industry Act provides for development trusts, which is a form of a sustainable approach. There's, people in terms of those who are into international investment, the most often cited bilateral investment treaty in the world today is Nigeria-Morocco bilateral investment treaty. And the reason, even though it's not operational as of yet, and the reason why that treaty is often mostly resorted to is because it was the first known international investment treaty that actually included provisions on human rights and sustainability, right? And so it caught the whole world unawares that, wow. So because international investment regime and human rights don't go hand in hand. Investment law does not. That's why currently there's a debate at international level where that we should reconstruct the whole idea about international investment law, that it seems to protect investors more at the detriment of citizens of local communities. So that bilateral investment treaty came and it provided human rights and sustainability, and that's why it's often most cited, even though it's not currently operational. So yes, you can make references to the need. We are at the age and time where we are moving towards sustainable approach. We are no more talking in terms of non-renewables. We are not talking of renewables, just transition renewable energy. And it is incumbent on companies to appreciate the importance of some of these discourses. Stabilization clauses, I believe, destroys the ability of local communities to respond to a project that they see is inimical to their existence. Most few clauses today don't even include that anymore. But there are still some, what I call colonial, relic, where it benefits states and as well multinational companies as well. So I think it's just for us to be on top of the game, ahead of the curve, and be able to recommend. I don't think your boss will, unless your boss says don't talk about issues of human rights at all. Just look at the contract and whether it fulfills all the requirements of law. But other than that, if you're just asked to look at it, and that includes also issues of human rights sustainability, also includes issues that I think as a young lawyer, if you include it, I think that will even help in growing across the board, that, oh, you could bring up this issue that we didn't even know about, because some of your bosses probably have trained 15, 20, 30 years ago when some of these issues were not that important. So they didn't even know how important these issues are in today, in reality today. So I think, yes, I think nothing stops you from talking about it, and just recommending, suggesting it to your bosses as to the one why. You must have to justify why it is important. It creates that legitimacy, trust with the local communities. It just good corporate image on the part of the government. It enhances social license to operate. And another concept which I didn't talk about much is this indigenous law of free prior informed consent, right? Where companies must obtain consent from the local communities before they do any project, especially where it has to do with indigenous peoples. So I think it is important that you can, nothing stops you from doing that.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Oyemi. Okay, we have one final hand that is up, and we're taking questions before going to the chat box. That is from Victoria. Victoria, please go ahead and ask your question. Hello, Victoria, are you with us?
Yes, I am. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Dennis. Thank you to our lovely mentors for today. Thank you so much for the wonderful insights. And my question is in two folds. One sort of flows into the other. So we have heard today a lot about companies and human rights, companies and human rights. And flowing from the question, from the topic for today, which is business and human rights, I would love to ask if institutions such as like education, now institutions are under or are part of this business, in the sense that we know that they are not really, most of them are not really companies in the sense of what we know companies to be, but they are businesses that interact with people, interact with workers, the students, and even the community. So that's going to be like the first base of the question. And secondly, if these aspects relates or involves educational institutions, I would love to ask what is the measure to ensure that these human rights in these institutions are being protected? Because this is one of the most overlooked aspects of human rights protection we have in, let's say, Nigeria. Because when you have students and lecturer relationships, when you have students and the school generally, or you have lecturer and the school and the institution, when it comes to these dynamics, we find a lot of gaps, a lot of loopholes with little to no redress form. So if anything is happening in the school and maybe students are feeling discriminated in how they are being treated, maybe in their environment, how it is, there's little to no redress for them because it's just to go and complain to the school. And once the school does not listen to you or decides not to listen to you, that's the end of it. There's really nothing you can do because you can't say you want to start taking them to court, even if you can. There's no, I don't know how to explain, there's no proper framework, number one, and there's no proper system or redress because at the end of the day, they can easily just do something to sabotage you or sabotage your results. So this is a concern that I am having, not just in university level, we have in secondary school, primary school, in all aspects. So if it does fall under this topic and this and everything we have been discussing, what is the proper process for us to be able to protect the rights of students in schools and even the staff members too, particularly students? Thank you.
Well, thank you, Victoria, that your question. Yeah, like you identified, this is, principally more about the concept is about business and human rights, and to that extent, I know we have public institutions, we have private institutions, so they're administered differently. And to the extent that some of these public institutions are not classified as businesses, strictly speaking, they might not fall under the application of business and human rights principles. So that does not mean that as a public institution, or even if it's a private institution, they cannot have human rights integrated into their modes of operation. I mean, institutions of higher learning are grounds for shaping and building future leaders. So it is expected they are top notch. But if I think I'm trying to understand your question cuts across different issues, like for example, discrimination, lecturer student or lecturer universities. I think there are different avenues for that within the school. There are some NGOs that, again, depending on the issue, I don't want to just assume, depending on the issue, if it's sexual harassment, for example. So there are so many avenues through which you can engage with that. You can start, from reporting the incident, and if you think the university is not taking appropriate concern, seek the activities of some NGOs who are devoted or dedicated to that. And I know there's some cases where they've significantly assisted in helping achieve that. But if it has to do with maybe businesses, maybe there's a business within the institution that is selling something which is not directly exclusively under the control of the university, like third-party vendors or contractors. I think the first process will also be to report to the university as well that they're selling, maybe, I don't know, whatever the issue, substandard products, fake products, or they're selling food poison or whatever it is. And if they are not, taking direct measures that maybe complain to the a responsible state agency in charge of that, maybe Department of Education. I think the Department or the Ministry of Education should have, complete mechanisms where you should be able to file this complaint. But but the educational system is a little bit works differently in terms of some of these discussions, but in terms of whether if your rights have been violated, of course you can seek for remedies or justice with whichever body, whether it's business, whether it's educational institutions or whatever it is. You can certainly obtain justice if you think your rights have been violated. And you have the National Industrial Court, for example, which operates differently from a state court, but it completely talks about labor rights. If you're an employee, employer, that would be a good place to institute. You don't have to go through the lengthy court process of formalized state adjudication system. But there is no particular entity, whether it's business, whether it's educational institutions, that should not have human rights principles adopted as part of their modes of operation.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Mr.
you. Let me just add. Uh, there's this foundation for investigative journalism, FIJ. I think they're quite active. Once you've exhausted maybe some of the mechanisms within your university for raising those issues, whatever they may be, and you feel like you still need help, especially maybe with the threat of victimization and all of that, you can easily reach out to FIJ. You can find them on fij.ng. They are quite active. In fact, they delve into any kind of matter of a human rights nature, and they will definitely be willing to assist. I think their services are also pro bono. So they will do the thinking for you. They will do the investigation. They will do all of that just to see how you can get redress. You can also reach out to maybe the National Human Rights Commission office in your state, for example, if it's of such a nature that you need to get the Human Rights Commission involved. So there are a lot of avenues for you to be able to get help. But FIJ is a very active is a very active foundation, and I'm very sure that they love things like this. They love the controversies and all that. So that's another option. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Stars. Before we take the question on the chat box, we'll just quickly want to take our pictures. We do it as part of just a show of solidarity for our presence within class for both the side of the mentors and the mentees. So please, for the mentees, please, we would like to quickly take pictures. So if you can quickly turn on your videos so that we can take a quick screenshot of the session. All right, can we have mentees turn on their videos? Let's quickly do that before we are closely coming to the end of the program. So let's quickly do that. Hello, our mentees listening. Let's quickly turn on our videos. Thank you.
One of the reasons why pictures are really important, sometimes you may want to make reference to a picture or maybe make reference to anything in life, and you never can tell how important a picture, can create value, future value. It's more of you are banking social capital for the future. So when you hear picture time, like it should be an exciting time for everyone to really put on their cameras. While we do this very quickly. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you everyone, and thank you so much, Mr. Joseph. Right, I can see we are turning on our videos. We'll quickly do that. Just give me a minute. Let's have more people turn on their videos. Thank you. Okay. All right, so we are done with that. Thank you everyone for cooperating. That cooperated. Thank you very much. So yeah, we'll be taking our last question. That is the last question that we'll for today. That's the question on chat box. Okay. The question is from. Sorry, I'm trying to get a hold of it. The question is from Faith. Faith is asking, okay, the question is, while researching on the topic, I came across the Ogoni land case in Rivers State. It was held that judgment was given by the Hugh courts in favor of the people of Ogoni land. However, enforcement of such judgments became a problem. My question is, in situations of adverse damage to a community, how can enforcement of such judgments be effected? And then the second question here is, do you suggest that communities, before allowing companies like the TNCs, and that is transactional companies, come into their communities, a contract should be drafted in relation to their external accountability? So those are the questions from Faith. And we just want to hand the questions over to our mentors to help tackle that. Mr. Oyeni, if you have answers to those questions, we'd like for you to help tackle them.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm not sure about the particular case which Faith is referring to. If it's the Apan case, there's a case in Apan versus Shell where I wouldn't really say it was a judgment in favor of Ogoni land, but what the case just held was that the Dutch court held was that Shell Nigeria and not Shell UK, the global Shell, is responsible for the oil pollution or sabotage that happened in Nigeria. So because, Apan wanted Shell Global to be responsible, obviously, for various reasons, more money, more remediation of the oil pollution. But when the Dutch court applied Nigeria's conflict of law rules, because Nigeria's tort law is not sophisticated enough to approach that issue. So what the Dutch court did was to interpret choice of conflict of law rules and then come to a determination that Shell Nigeria would be responsible for that and not Shell Global. So in a way, I mean, there was judgment for the people in that at least Shell Nigeria and not just Apan would lose, particularly in that case. There was another case about, Shell climate change justice or climate change case where the lower court ruled that Shell must pay a particular amount of money for climate change, but at least the appeal court went ahead to say how the lower court reached that decision was kind of should be queried, and I think that case has been going currently on appeal. So whether it's the Pan case or this climate change case, I think your question borders on enforcement of such judgment, and that has to do with recognition and enforcement of international judgment. How do you serve the Nigerian parties or the Nigerian government? How do you? But if it applies to Shell, I think there are avenues for enforcing such judgments. I think as corporate actors, Shell would definitely international corporate actors. Shell has no other approach than to comply with that judgment, because if they fail to comply, another thing you could do as a litigant is to approach the same court and say that, well, Shell actually violated your judgment, decided not to enforce the judgment, and there are significant implications for that. The judge could rule that Shell's profits or shares, wherever it is that they are operating, anywhere in the world, should be seized. Their assets could be seized. So even though there might be challenges in Nigeria because of, as we know, political corruption, other issues, you can always approach Shell headquarters, the courts where they are domiciled or incorporated, and tell the court there that, look, Shell judge decided not to enforce your judgment, and no court wants to do that. Judges are very, very, very they don't like such a situation. They don't like their judgments not to be enforced. So their assets could be seized, their profits could be blocked, interfered. The same thing as well, I think, happens in Nigeria. If it were to be a domestic case, contempt of court. If you decide not to comply with the judgment of a court, there are significant implications and ramifications. So while there might be challenges at the local level, enforcement of such judgment at international level are very very often, and they could be done. And with the second question, if the other communities before aligned companies come into the community, contracts should be drafted. Well, the reality is that the reality is that some of these contracts are negotiated between states and the multinational companies. So the local communities who are beneficiaries, I mean, government will tell you, we're entering into this country just because of the citizens. We want better life for the citizens. But the citizens really are not even part of the negotiation strategy. So government wants to build one project in Ogoni land. How many Ogoni citizens are there when the government is negotiating with Shell or some of these oil companies? None. And by the doctrine of privity of contract, right? You can only sue if you're a party to a contract. If you're going to be even if you're a direct beneficiary of the contract, but you are not a party to the contract, the doctrine of privity of contract excludes you from claiming under the contract. So it gives communities put them in a tight spot to sue on that contract, to say that, well, this contract was done in bad faith, right? But there are other avenues to go around this archaic colonial rule. So that is why we argue that it is very important for companies, after having that legal license to operate, after negotiating with the state, they should have a social license to operate. And the only way you can get a social license to operate is by renegotiating with the local communities and tell them, look, government has told us to construct this development project. However, we realize that this development project may cause you some harm. How do we negotiate, mitigate this harm? What are we going to do? If you are going to relocate you from your current homes, how do we compensate? Where are we going to take you to? How do we prevent harming places of worship or where you have spiritual attachment? And some companies in some countries, they do what they call global memorandum of understanding. So companies enter into MOUs with local communities, and some of the things which might not be included in this contract between investors and state then will be included in that. And some of them are quite rightly, enforced. I think Canada uses community development agreements, which being an agreement, I think is naturally enforceable. So even if you don't have these, formalized contractual document where community voices are in there, there are other avenues through which companies can actually get community voices, right, inside an agreement, which would, of course, spell out their, like you asked, external accountability. So all the rights, your limits, liabilities will be included in that contract. And I think some responsible companies will just have to enforce it on the basis of good faith. So yes, I would suggest that companies, which is something that has really been going on, communities should have that, or companies should have that arrangement, that conversation with local communities before they go into their community. Because if they come with the basis that we have legal license to operate, so we can do anything we want to do, that's what leads to conflict. That's what leads to demonstration at the local level, and it creates unnecessary distraction, both for the company and for the community. So why not just do it in a sustainable way? Get them involved, sign whether it's a community development agreement, a memorandum of understanding, get a form of social license so that you're able to operate effectively without any conflict with the local communities.
Yeah, the only thing I would just add, thank you so much. In fact, you touched on a lot of things that the community development agreement, the CDA, that's actually very key. It's also be nice that communities that enjoy, the word enjoyment now, that enjoy these kinds of development, because there's a lot of risk attached to projects coming into communities and all that. It would be nice for communities to also invest in lawyers or professionals who understand the issues and can speak better on their behalf. Because much of the time, you see that if a community setup is very rowdy, then they may necessarily not be focusing on the very important issues. And these companies already have the experience. They've done projects across the world in different continents. They are in the local communities, maybe somewhere in Africa. They already have the experience of doing projects. They know the kinds of clauses, to put in certain documents. So it's good that communities also take advantage of professionals within their domain who understand the issues and who can represent the interest of those communities to the best of their ability. So I think that that's the only other addition that I felt I should just chip in. Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sirs. I think so far so good. We've had a great session today. Our mentors, we want to say a big thank you for stepping up to have this discussion with us and share your very intelligent insights into the topic for today, that's human and business rights. Officially, we've come to the end of today's class. We don't have any more questions from the mentees, so thank you so much, sirs. We are really grateful for your time and shared knowledge in class. Mr. Oyemi, we hope to have you in subsequent session. Come share your thoughts also with us. We also look forward to collaborating with you on other discussions as regards business and human rights. Thank you also, Mr. Joseph, for doing this and for always being here to always help us run through what business and human rights is, and also just give perspective to how remediation and people can get help when their rights are being violated by companies, and how we can generally go about seeking remedy. Thank you very much to our mentors. For the mentees, please do not forget to share what you have learned in today's class. Tag our mentors. We will share their flyers with you, right, so that you can tag them. You can tag them when you post. Share what you have learned. Spread the word. Let people get more awareness of what is going on. Right. Let us be a point of contact in that sense, right? That people can come to terms with business and human rights. For the mentees, once again, don't forget to fill in your attendance. See you all in the next class. Do all enjoy the rest of your evening, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks for the
Thank you.
invitation.
Thank you,
Pleasure
sir.
to meet you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.